Hi, this is Lisa Fent-Breedlove, and my presentation is on socialism and communism, the similarities and differences. Uh, First, the quote from Karl Marx: "The history of hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles," which is basically what every society goes through, according to Karl Marx. This slide shows some of the origins, the historical origins of communism and socialism. It began very, very long a time ago with Plato's Republic. He did establish a type of collective society in his literature. It's been highly debated, but his society depicted men and women as guardians of the class. They share with each other. There was no common ownership, only common consumption. And he was basically concerned with separating the ruling caste from economic affairs. Sir Thomas More wrote Utopia in 1516. He was a humanist. He believed in common ownership as the society's entire system of manufacturing and distribution. Gerard Winstanley wrote The Law of Freedom in 1652. His followers were called the True Levelers, and they later became known as the Diggers. This was during the English Civil Wars, and that's when the idea of socialism and communism really took hold there. He imagined an ecological interrelationship between humans and nature, acknowledging the inherent connections between people and their surroundings. And finally, Robert Owen was considered the father of British socialism. He was an advocate of human living standard for the collective good and cooperation of all. He did not advocate a living wage, a common living wage, but he was more into the humane circumstances or conditions at that time. He bought 30,000 acres in Indiana in 1825 and tried to begin his cooperative society. It was called New Harmony, and unfortunately, it did not succeed. This is a picture of Karl Marx, Spread the Wealth, and according to Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica, socialism is a social or economic doctrine that calls for public rather than private ownership or control of the property and natural resources. Communism is a political or economic doctrine that aims to replace private property and a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of at least the major means of production and the natural resources of society. I kind of feel like they're saying the same thing. I really can't tell the difference from this particular definition, so I really enjoyed digging a little bit deeper into that. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. The original title was the Manifesto of the Communist Party, and they were commissioned by a small group of radicals called the Communist League. They believed that all societies had experienced similar patterns of history, and in every history was built upon a materialistic theory. According to Marx, history is a series of class struggles and revolutionary upheavals, leading ultimately to the freedom of all. They say that this was possibly a critique of capitalism, or obviously a critique of capitalism, but a rough draft of possible future communist society. It didn't have a lot of detail, especially about communism, in this particular book. In 1875, Marx wrote the Critique of Gotha Program. Marx used communism and socialism, the terms, interchangeably. So I think maybe he wanted to differentiate in this text, is what I learned. In each stage, the dominant class uses its control of means of production to exploit labor of a larger class of workers. Marx identified these two phases and predicted that socialism would overthrow capitalism. Both were at as yet unrealized stages of humanity's economic development and heralded by the working class who seized the state. The similarities and differences in socialism and communism in the Marxist theory. Material scarcity. In socialism, that is does not, like in capitalism, it does not overcome, socialism does not overcome scarcity. Under socialism, the social surplus increases, but it's not sufficiently large enough yet to cover all the competing claims or needs, to cover all the needs. The state is done away with, so socialism does transform that. Like capitalism, though, socialism will feature an occupation specialization. Under socialism, people have what he called capitalistic attitudes about production and distribution, so they expect compensation in varying degrees for their input. In communism, it has done away with the division of labor, mostly between mental and physical labor. There's no difference. It has also done away with the state. Communist producers are regarded both as work is regarded as both instrumentally and intrinsically valuable. Attitudes have changed, perhaps in part because the work has changed, but their work is not merely a means of life. It's actually a goal or a desire. It's intrinsically valuable. Under communism, human beings themselves change to become all-around highly developed individuals rather than one-sided creatures like they are under capitalism, and maybe under socialism too. Material scarcity has been eliminated, or at least greatly reduced, almost eliminated completely under communism. Thus, everything is flowing, the wealth is flowing among everybody, and they're sharing it. Communist society is able to conform to the famous principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And as a result of these changes, the link found between contribution and reward has been severed, and communism is the lowest, most successful phase, according to Marx. This slide goes over some of the famous historical figures in communist history. First, of course, is Karl Marx. And then there is Vladimir Lenin. He was the first leader of the Soviet Union. Leon Trotsky, a Bolshevik revolutionary and second only to Vladimir. Mao Zedong, founder of the Chinese Communist Party. Joseph Stalin, the second leader of the Soviet Union. Of course, Hitler, National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis. Fidel Castro, one of the most dangerous revolutionaries, and Che Guevara, a prominent communist figure in the Cuban Revolution. So it was interesting to read about all these figures too. I just did not know how prevalent in history these theories of socialism and communism have been for so many countries, and not the United States. You just think everybody's more like us than different, and that was not the case. I really enjoyed this exercise. It was one of the best projects that I think I've done in a very long while. Here's the details about those historical figures. I just really enjoyed this particular assignment. I have not ever really delved into the differences between socialism and communism, or really even knew that much about Karl Marx, and I really loved it. It was very educational, and I think everybody should have to do this when we're talking about politics or, presidential elections. And there's so many people. I mean, I consider myself, to be pretty investigative, and there's so many people that probably don't know the difference between any of this. So I think it was a really good exercise.